Hello and welcome to Caregivers First, the show brought to you by SCAN, the Social Communities Activities Network, a nonprofit agency dedicated to helping active adults stay informed, empowered, and inspired. I'm Lavelle Jones, AARP New Jersey State President and the host of Caregivers First. We have such a great show for you today, so let's get started. Good nutrition, along with physical activity and other factors, promotes good health. Our diet affects our health throughout our lifetimes. Healthy eating principles are good for all of us. And the more informed we are as caregivers, the better we can serve those in our charge. I am so pleased to have as my guest today, Dr. Felicia Stoller, an expert in the field of health and wellness. Dr. Stoller's bio is very impressive. Let me read just a little bit of that. Dr. Stoller is a registered dietitian, exercise physiologist, and expert consultant in disease prevention, wellness, and healthful living. She has a bachelor's degree from Tulane University, a master's in applied physiology and nutrition from Columbia University, and a doctorate in clinical nutrition from Rutgers University. Dr. Stoller serves on many local, state, and national committees related to health and wellness. She is a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, a diplomat in lifestyle medicine, and a council member of the True Health Initiative. Dr. Stoller is one of the most sought-after nutrition fitness experts for TV, radio, newspapers, and magazines in the United States. She hosted the second season of TLC's groundbreaking series, Honey, We're Killing the Kids, and she is the author of Living Skinny in Fat Jeans, The Healthy Way to Lose Weight and Feel Great. Dr. Stoller is passionate about helping people live healthier lives. She currently is strategic advisor for El Nutra and Nutrition for Longevity, and she resides in Homedale, New Jersey. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stoller.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is our pleasure to have you on to talk about such an important topic. I would like to start with some basics, if we could.
Sure.
We all know that nutrition is so important, but I'm not sure that we all understand exactly why. So if you could lead off by sharing with us how foods we eat and beverages we drink impact our health.
My pleasure. So, if you think about Hippocrates, he was like the father of medicine. He has this famous quote, "Let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food," right? And sometimes people don't like that because medicine sounds like something bad. But if you think about it, all organisms, human, animal, they need nutrients to take in order to thrive. Even the plants that we eat, they need to take in nutrients. So, when I went to graduate school and I was learning about nutrition, it was always about carbohydrates, proteins, fats, specific vitamins, specific minerals. But then when I got out, it's like, well, actually, you have to eat those within food. So what does that actually entail? What does that mean? And what are some of the best choices when it comes to health? Because we know that there are direct relationships between the foods that we eat and how they impact health. So if you look at some of the top, whether you look at it as causes of death in the world or you look at it in terms of illnesses that people get, overweight and obesity really fuel some of the problems around health. We look at heart disease, diabetes, complications of that, stroke, even some cancers are directly related to the foods that we take in. So the question is, how do you make the healthy choice the easy choice? Yes. And how do we navigate through such muddy waters when, Dr. Google is out there and the internet is a blessing and a curse at the same time, where there's so much information available to people where, 20 years ago when I was switching careers, it was reading magazines, right? I got information from magazines, newspapers, television, when people actually used to trust the news to be objective. And so, there's so much information out there. What part of why I went back to school is that I couldn't understand that information and apply it. You know, understanding how the body works, how we take these nutrients in and utilize them. So when you think about foods that we eat, for example, the lining of our GI tract is the first line of immune defense in our body. So people think about things like foods that contain probiotics, and then we hear a lot about fiber, right? So that's just one little example, but at the end of the day, we need carbohydrates for our bodies to work. The easiest example I could give you is carbohydrates are like gasoline in a car. When the tank goes to empty, we have to put more in, and we can only store 6 to 7 hours worth of carbohydrates in our body. And then protein that we take in is like the parts of the car. It's like your 4 wheels, it's like your windshield wipers. There's a specific amount that we have that we need in order for our car to run, but then there's a specific amount that we need to eat in order for, you know, to maintain turnover. And then the fat that we take in, it's like the oil that we put in our car, right? There's a certain amount that we need it to function properly, but we don't need excessive amounts of it because oil in the car is not what fuels the car. And yes, we do use some fat for fuel, but that's not the predominant fuel that the body prefers to use. So what contains carbohydrates? Foods that come from plants, so fruits, vegetables, grains, things like rice, anything that comes out of the dirt or out of a tree, right? Or off of a plant that contains carbohydrates. The only thing that comes from an animal that contains carbohydrates is milk or dairy products. Whether it be from a cow, from a goat, or a sheep, that's the only way that when we get carbohydrates from food that comes from an animal, that's where that comes from. Protein is made up of amino acids. Those are the building blocks of protein. We get those from plant foods. We get them from animal foods. And then fats are found in every food group except pretty much fruits. I mean, if you consider like a coconut or an avocado a fruit, then there would be examples of where you would be getting fat in your diet. But, you know, we need fat to help carry fat-soluble vitamins into our body.
Well, I have to say, this is the first time I have heard the analogy to a car, and I think it's very good for me because let me repeat it to make sure I have it correctly. So carbohydrates are the fuel, and then proteins are the parts of the car.
CPP, right? Protein and parts.
And then fat would be
like the oil.
The oil, okay.
Right? You get an oil change in your car. You know, we need some oil, but we don't. The amount of oil that you need in your car is not as significantly large as what you need for the fuel or the gas that goes into the car.
Okay, that I can absolutely understand that because I only get my oil changed. You know, it's periodically, maybe once a year, but I need gas all the time.
Right.
That's a good way for me to visualize it.
So if you think about the different associations that have dietary guidelines, well, there's the dietary guidelines, which is part of our government process with the dietary guidelines. They're up for review again in 2020. They have a scientific panel that sits down and they assess where we should be. You have American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, American Cancer Society give guidelines. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics have guidelines. The World Health Organization have guidelines. What they all have is they're very consistent in their messaging. That is, we should be eating more plant-based foods, first and foremost. So that means fruits, vegetables, whole grains, right? We should be eating less processed foods. When we do eat animal proteins, they should be in smaller amounts. And that we should have fats, but we want to stay away from trans fats, which we know really aren't found in the food supply very much anymore. There was legislation passed which required labeling, which also then meant companies found replacements for those fats. So I know it can be very confusing. You know, do you have full-fat dairy? Do you have low-fat dairy? Do you have butter? Do you have margarine? Which oils to use? Right. It can be the stuff that makes you so crazy you don't know what's left to eat.
Well, one of the things you mentioned earlier was the wealth of information, valid or not, that we can find on the web, also on TV, you hear it on the radio. Every day I hear more news about different diets, let's say, that are popular. In fact, recently I have heard about something called the keto diet. Don't know what that is, but I see a lot written about it. And so I'm wondering if you can, give us give us your perspective on some of these popular diets.
Right.
And I guess even beyond that, also kind of give us what are just the basic components of a healthy diet.
Sure, absolutely. There are a lot of diets that are very popular right now. So there's the keto diet, there's the paleo diet. I mean, the paleo diet, I love that. Eat like the caveman. Well, the caveman didn't live to be more than 35 years old, 40 years old. So I don't want to eat like the caveman because they didn't live very long. So that wouldn't be something that I would be going for. The keto diet is about keeping your body in ketoacidosis or in a ketotic state based upon eating a very high fat, sort of higher protein diet with low amounts of carbohydrates. So that has been effective that's actually used therapeutically for people that have seizures. But in terms of long-term health outcomes, we don't know the long-term health outcomes of that. And again, when I was speaking to you before about how the body works, that's not the preferred fuel source for the body. The brain relies on carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. The brain is one of the most important organs in the body. It's mm-hmm. the master control for the rest of our body. So we want to feed it what it needs. There's a term called hangry, where people get a little they get angry when they're hungry. So if you think about that, you get angry because the brain needs fuel. The body is amazing at adaptation, and we can, break down other components in our body, and we can create ketone bodies to feed the brain, but that's not the ideal situation. I've worked with a lot of athletes over the years, and that is, especially endurance athletes, that's not what they're using for fuel. So you can look at some immediate goals. So people use those for, let's say, weight loss, mm-hmm. short-term weight loss, but then always what is sustainable over time? Can you maintain that for a long period of time? And do we know the impacts of that and look at the long-term health outcomes? We try to look at relationships. There's different types of research where they call like correlation versus causation research. So epidemiology studies are big studies where you look at outcomes over time, and then you want to try to go back and take factors and pair them up and say, well, did this create that? There's a relationship here, but then you need the cause and effect. Mm-hmm. So whenever we see research studies, first of all, they have to be able to be replicated and have the same outcomes in order for them to be valid. Mm-hmm. They should go through a peer review process. And can we actually say that something definitively causes something? So I was talking before about the relationship between diseases. So for example, if we were to look at heart disease, which is still the #1 killer in the United States, and we look at comparing the causes of that, mm-hmm. it's not because people are eating enough fruits and vegetables, because we look at research data called NHANES, mm-hmm. and we look at consumption patterns of Americans. And if Americans are not getting the fruits and vegetables and grains and fiber mm-hmm. that they need, well, then we can say, well, there's a relationship there between diet and disease risk.
I see.
Right? So that would be one example of that. But in terms of breaking it down, what we can look at, which is what I said to you before with the different organizations, is, again, eating foods closer to the way they're found in nature. So when I'm talking about fruits or vegetables, I would love it if it's fresh, but if it's canned, if it's frozen, if that's more affordable or easier for someone to prepare, mm-hmm. that's great. I mean, potatoes are a vegetable, but if you're only eating them as potato chips or French fries, that's not the best way to get them.
Yes.
We have, different times of the year, sure. like Thanksgiving, and I know sometimes, sure.
The
winter holidays, people
mm-hmm.
take sweet potatoes and turn it
right.
into pie, right? So.
Well, it's wonderful you mentioned Thanksgiving, because that's coming up soon. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about what we can do to have healthy recipes, especially around the holidays. And right now, what we're going to do is take a quick break. We will take a break, and when we come back, we'll share more important information on eating healthy.
You probably already know that rehabilitation is a must for successful recovery from surgery, injury, or serious illness. What you may not know is that you're free to choose where you go for rehab. In Monmouth and Ocean County, the compelling choice is Care One. Where you choose to go for rehab matters, and with Care One, you have 4 convenient locations to choose from in Monmouth and Ocean counties. Care One at Jackson, Care One at Wall, Care One at Homedale, and Care One at King James in the Atlantic Highlands. At Care One, you'll work with a team of experts to develop a plan based on your needs and goals. You'll have the full support of caring, compassionate physicians, RNs, licensed therapists, and nutritionists dedicated to helping you recover successfully without setbacks at a pace that makes you comfortable and successful in meeting your rehabilitation goals. Once you take the first step with us, you'll never look back. Call 877-99-CARE-1 today and come for a tour.
Welcome back to Caregivers First. Our guest is Dr. Felicia Stoller. And Dr. Stoller, before the break, we were beginning to talk about healthy diets and the upcoming holiday season. So I'd like to explore that a little more, specifically in terms of caregivers. You know that because there are so many demands on caregivers, they very often neglect themselves, right, including eating healthy. Right. The biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges for caregivers is that they don't have time to cook food from scratch. Right. So can you give us some meal options, some better meal options for not just caregivers, but for those that they care for?
Right. Well, you know, that's an excellent question. I mean, people are really busy. We have very busy lives, and it can be very hard to find the time to make food. I think people have good intention, and some people lack the skills, and some people lack, you know, time is a big factor that I think all of us wish we had more of. But I would say if you could start with good ingredients, and even if you have to get some things that are already prepped and heated up, it's not so bad, you know, like
frozen fruit,
like frozen foods. You know, a lot of the grocery store chains around here have ready prepped meals. I mean, one of the things I would do very often, even when my kids were younger, I mean, you talk about there are caregivers around the continuum. So there's children, there's sometimes we have family members, yes, that are ill or just caring for older, you know, parents, yes, or grandparents or aunts and uncles or other people in our lives. So like something I used to do real easy, I wouldn't have time to roast, let's say, a whole chicken, but every grocery store has rotisserie chicken. So I would buy the rotisserie chicken and then maybe take some broccoli, you know, the bagged broccoli, and stick that in the microwave, mm-hmm, and make that. Or maybe using, you know, a quick pasta. Pasta doesn't take as long to make. So while I'm making all of that stuff, I can, you know, heat that up, or have like a whole grain rice or some other grains to go along with that, or other vegetables, mm-hmm, you know, like spinach takes no time at all to sort of whip up, yes, in the kitchen. So those are things. But again, like if you have things that are frozen, crock pots and these Instapots are really popular right now with people. So maybe if you could do meal prep one day of the week where, you know, you're starting off maybe laying out your food for the, mm-hmm, week. You can even put stuff in your fridge or your freezer that goes into a crock pot every day, and you turn it on before you go to work. That's an easy thing that people can, you know, consider doing. I mean, there's great websites that have recipes that are available, you know, to make things easier. You don't even have to buy cookbooks, mm-hmm, anymore. I mean, mm-hmm, there's so many great recipes that you can get. But, you know, I don't want people to think that everything has to be fresh. I mean, yeah, even if you have to go out to eat, that's okay too. It's just hard when you dine out or when you're buying prepared foods, you don't know what else is in there. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, a lot of times there's extra fat in there, there's extra sodium in there that, you know, pleases the American palate, but maybe isn't best, mm-hmm, for our health. So when you cook for yourself, you have more control over that.
Well, one of the questions I have, I tend to eat out of cans a, mm-hmm, lot. I know you mentioned earlier that perhaps we should avoid processed foods. Does that apply to canned foods? For example, I eat a lot of canned green beans all the time, and I find that is very useful for me because I don't have a lot of time. Should I be
Oh,
Should
I love
not
canned
be-
peas. What do you mean? I love
Okay.
that. I mean, I could just eat it out of the can. I don't even have to heat it up. That's one of
Okay.
those favorite foods that I have. And you know, what's happened is that a lot of companies are putting less sodium in there. So, you know, they may not put it on the label. I've been around food industry for a long time. They talked about how when they say something's low sodium, people assume it's not going to taste good. But they have, as an industry, the Canned Food Alliance and all their brands have really worked very hard to reduce sodium levels in the food. So yeah, you can absolutely have that. And you know, something that I think is really important that we should talk about that is something that's a pet peeve of mine is food waste. You know, there are dates on foods that people think the food is going to spoil. It's really meant to be like sell-by dates. And there are a lot of type foods that could be in a can, like for example, you're talking about green beans or
Yes.
vegetables. They could last a lot longer than some of the dates that are on there. The foods that we have to be most concerned with are those protein-based foods, like a chicken or a beef. Like those types of foods would go bad a little bit sooner. But, you know, even in the freezer, some people have this rule of thumb. If it's been in there for a certain amount of time, then they toss it. Food waste contributes to a significant amount of greenhouse gases in this world. So my kids know I hate food waste. I take foods, like we're talking before, like about a rotisserie chicken. After everybody, you know, ate what they want, I would take the rest of it and make chicken soup out of it. Like if there's produce in my refrigerator, that especially vegetables that I haven't consumed and I'm afraid it's going to go bad, it goes in a pot and I make soup out of it. And then I freeze it in individual containers so I have that available for myself and for my family to use. So, you know, food waste is something that I think, you know, we could talk about, especially with Thanksgiving.
This has been, I have to share with you, and I'm going to admit that I'm one of those people, if I see an expiration date on a can, I toss it immediately, even if it's that day. And I've had a running contest with my sister, and she's saying, you know, if you eat it 2 days after that sell-by date, it's okay. And I've always told her, no, it isn't. When you see that date, you have to throw it out right away.
Right.
So apparently that's not a rule.
It depends. You know, like milk, you can go a few days, but you know, you always need to smell it. I mean, I've gone to drink milk that is still within the expiration date, and it's been bad.
Yes.
So, you know, that you also don't know sometimes in terms of refrigeration where maybe something got lost in the food safety chain. But, you know, I think there's a difference between something that's like refrigerated, frozen food, and canned food has a much longer shelf life than people realize. So a lot of those use by dates, you know, things can, believe it or not, be frozen for like indefinitely and then be, you know, reused again. So people should not, you know, think that they need to toss food, because there are a lot of people that go hungry, and food waste is something that just drives me crazy.
I appreciate your bringing up that point, and I love your recommendation about, you know, taking advantage of the rotisserie chickens that you can buy already prepared. That certainly is a time saver. So I'm going to see if I can follow up on that suggestion. I know that in your expertise as a wellness expert, that you talk about things in addition to food. We've talked a lot about food.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to address some of the other factors that impact our health. And so I'm going to ask you to, if you'd like to share some of those, I guess we call them lifestyle factors.
Yes, I appreciate your queuing me up for that, because that is so important. You know, people just want to look at one end of the energy continuum. They want to look at the food, the input, but what do we do with our bodies? So exercise, you know, people think about physical, and I should not even say exercise, I should say physical activity. It's using our bodies, right? Movement, doing daily movement. So that is so important. It's not about weight, it's about mental health, it's about energy, it's about circulation, it's about working our heart and our lungs out as muscles. They need to be exercised every day. It's about bone density, it's about muscle mass, you know, maintaining muscle mass, which is a challenge as people get older, that they feel that they atrophy, that they have less muscle mass. People think that their metabolism slows down. Their metabolism slows down because they have less muscle mass. With our bodies, it's use it or lose it. So I've been doing a lot of work in the longevity space because, let's face it, I'm getting older. I'm on the other side of 50, and this has become important to me. I want to have a good health span. I want to live longer and healthier with less disease and less need for medication and perhaps less medical intervention. So if you look at places around the world, whether you call them blue zones or centenarian regions, places where people live to be 100 or more, what do they have in common? They eat plant-based. They eat moderate amounts of animal source protein, not a lot. They actually use it more for seasoning than they do as that whole side of their plate. They do physical activity daily. They get adequate sleep. They have less stress in their lives, and something that they call conviviality when having loving relationships. So conviviality is like being a part of a community, feeling like you have a purpose. So these are really important things that doctors aren't speaking to patients about. And these are things that we should speak amongst ourselves about. You know, they're really important for living life vibrantly and with purpose, and to help us to live better, longer.
I see. You mentioned sleep. I'm curious. What is the recommended number of sleep hours that those of us who are on the other side of 50 should get?
Well, that's good, because younger people need a lot more than we do. But, you know, the sleep experts would tell you 7 to 9 hours of sleep is really considered ideal. And it's not just the amount of time you're laying in bed, it's whether or not you're getting quality sleep. We know that there are relationships between people that have sleep apnea, that have poor sleep abilities, and heart disease and heart attack and stroke. So it is very important, if you're not sleeping well and you wake up feeling really tired, that you actually have that evaluated. So whether it be CPAP devices or night guards or other ways to help people improve the quality of their sleep, because here's a little big tidbit of information. We burn the most fat as a fuel while we're sleeping. So it's really important, you know, think about how we plug our devices in at night. It is when the body has the opportunity to rest, recharge, repair, and renew. And if we're not getting a good quality sleep, then we're not doing justice to our body.
I see. Now, I have a question connected to sleep and to food. I have been told all of my life that you shouldn't eat any food after 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night.
Right.
Is that based in any kind of fact, or is that just, you know, an old wives' tale? I don't know.
I think some of it was arbitrary time frames. If you think about it, like we were talking before about the paleo, you know, ancient humans, they spent all day out hunting and gathering and getting food, and then when it was dark out, they went to sleep. They weren't eating. With the creation or the application of fire and electricity, we've been able to extend light so that we can do things during other hours of the day. There's a whole body of science that's evolving around what they call fasting and intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, and looking at actually the window of hours that we're sleeping. I mean, it's something I'm really fascinated with, and working with a company right now that is doing a lot of work in that space. So if you think about that, you know, how many hours in a day are you eating? What time do you wake up? What time do you start eating? And then when do you finish? I had a patient at my office last night who was telling me that her young daughter has a hard time going to sleep, but they eat very late because mom gets home from work very late. And I said, well, if you're first eating at 8:30 and you think your 5-year-old is going to go to sleep at 9:30, her body is still working to digest that food. I mean, the body will do that, but in terms of being alert, you know, whether or not you have reflux or you're having indigestion, I mean, those are the reasons why you shouldn't. But we also want to give our body a break so that we're not always processing food all the time. We don't need to eat it continually throughout the 24-hour cycle.
And so we should, to your point, we should really be aware of our lifestyles, and we should plan our eating habits accordingly.
Agreed.
So I think that's wonderful advice. Dr. Stoller, you have given us so much wonderful information that I'm going to take action on myself. So I want to thank you so very much. This has been absolutely incredibly informative. Thank you so very much for being here. And I want to thank all of our viewers for spending time with us. I do hope that you enjoyed the discussion and found the information useful. If you did, please share it with your family, friends, and neighbors. It has been my privilege to be your host today. I do hope that you'll join us for the next edition of Caregivers First. Until then, take care.